So it's that time of year where people usually are looking to use books as a way to self-improve and get better in life. And I use books to self-improve. And I thought, if I was starting over, like, where would I start? Which topics would I explore first? And I think I have a pretty good list. And this is kind of actually how I did it. So the first one was actually philosophy. Philosophy is probably the most important subject to start with because every other book you're going to use, whether they are honest about this or not, is going to use philosophy. They're going to use what are called presuppositions, just basically background assumptions that they're probably not even aware they're making them. Like naive realism is a very common one in the Western world. If you go to the average person in the Western world and you start talking about idealism or solipsism of some sorts, they're going to say you're insane. And when you point to them that, well, why should I pick realism over solipsism? They're going to just say realism is obviously true, like direct realism. And that's why it's kind of, I'm pretty sure that's why it's kind of adopted the name naive realism, because it's just taken for granted. So when you read philosophy, you're going to quickly be able to realize that other people's worldviews are based on presuppositions. Now, I'm not saying read philosophy to debunk other people's worldviews, by the way. I'm just saying you should read philosophy to be aware that other people have these presuppositions, because that will allow you to focus on the important things about what someone's saying rather than focusing on their philosophical assumptions. I actually think philosophy is, by and large, useless in the sense of how like an engineer would use that word. If it's fun for you, then sure, you can read it. Maybe then it's not useless, but it's not fruitful to spend many, many hours debating the metaphysics of a tree, right? As William James would say. So get philosophy out of the way, get really woke at philosophy, understand how it's used on a day-to-day basis. And then once you thoroughly understand philosophy, you can just kind of ignore it, but you still have to understand it. You can't ignore it to begin with. I think you should get it out of the way first. Now, the second one that I think is probably going to be the most important here, so number 2, is psychology. And I don't mean like self-help books. What I do mean is like academic psychology. So understanding debates between nature and nurture. How flexible is human behavior, right? Can you modulate it infinitely? That's an interesting question. And what is modulable? What isn't? So what can you actually change? What can't you change? What are your limits as an individual? And then on top of that, the psychotherapy. So considering how your childhood has impacted certain behaviors, placing doubts on certain motivations, just exploring yourself more thoroughly, I think is really, really important, because if you don't do that, then you're kind of almost like, it's like walking in a minefield without a minesweeper, because there's going to be certain things that trigger you and you might not be aware of them. There might be certain things you're doing to other people that is completely unfair. Like a lot of people will have really, really bad interpersonal ethics because their parents raised them terribly. And because all they knew was terrible parenting, as a result, they don't understand how scuffed their interpersonal ethics are on a day-to-day basis. And so they end up only making friends with other people who have really bad interpersonal ethics, right? And you don't really want that in your life. You want to have good interpersonal ethics, which means you really need to question how you were raised as a child. So yeah, psychology is probably the second most important. And so I think those two right there are going to be the most important for you becoming actually like a intelligent, well-rounded, responsible human being. Those two categories are going to be the most important for challenging you as an individual. The next one is a bit of a placeholder. I think you should learn one of the hard sciences. I think for number 3, it should be one of the hard sciences. It could be chemistry, physics, biology, even engineering. You could throw math in there, but math isn't really reading. It's more, because especially for what I'm getting at here, I don't think math is applicable, but even ecology, geology, whatever you want, right? Any of the hard sciences, I would learn one of them, because hard sciences have a way of viewing the world that can help you a lot in pretty much any problem-solving situation. It's this idea that if you just take this naturalist worldview, not like naturalist in the sense that supernatural versus natural, but I mean like methodological naturalism, where you take variables that are observable or quantifiable, right, but ultimately observable. You gather enough observation data about them, and you can then synthesize a prediction into the future about them, right? And now, because you already have this philosophy background, you don't have to get lost in the philosophy of science weeds that always happens. You don't have to think that your scientific theory is true. All you care about is the utility of predicting data or predicting some observable thing, right? And that kind of outlook can be carried on to everything else in life. And the natural sciences will do a great job at beating that into you, especially because the debates in natural sciences among scientists will always be about observable data until ego gets involved. Then maybe not always, but generally speaking, it's observable data. So I think you should learn one of the natural sciences, or the hard sciences, sorry. I think that would be super important. The next one, obviously, is going to be finance. You are living inside an economy. And I was torn between economics and finance here. I do think it's important to understand how an economy works, but if you manage your money wisely, you pretty much can ignore the economy, right? Only thing that you really need to focus on is outcompeting inflation. And if you can do that, you can pretty much ignore the economy as long as you don't tie up all your assets into like one super, all your money into like one super risky asset or something, right? You don't want to do that. But if you study personal finance and like the psychology of money and how to manage money and just the fundamental insights of compounding, you can get away with just knowing finance and not knowing anything about the economy and actually make pretty decent returns. I've always talked about this book, The Interpretation of Financial Statements by Mary Buffett and David Clark. If you read that book and then you just pick some solid companies, you can pretty much ignore you could ignore the economy entirely, especially if you also have ETFs, you can ignore the economy. Just don't buy in at the peaks. And that will help you with your like money side of living. Like you're living in an economy, so you're going to have to know how to deal with money. And so finance has to be up there for that reason. And you don't have to get really woke, just a little bit of finance, maybe like 5-10 books, and you'll be good to go. Now, this next one might surprise people, but I think it's really important, and if it wasn't for money, I would put it above finance, and it's law. You don't have to become a lawyer. You don't have to become like a paralegal or anything, but you do need to understand the basics of law if you want to assuming you're using books to develop as a person, if you want to get ahead in life, knowing a lot about the law will help, especially, like you don't want to be in this situation where a legal issue arises or you're in a questionable situation where you don't know your legal standing, because then you have to scramble and study, and that's not good. Now, why am I saying this? Because like if you go into a corporation and you're high up on the corporate ladder, you're going to need to know the law. There's going to be contracts that are applicable to you. You're going to have to know how far outside of a contract someone is going, or are they well within the rights of the contract? Is someone breaking labor law when they're dealing with you, or are you breaking labor law, right? On top of that, when you are getting into these upper echelons of life, there will be people who are intelligent and aggressive, especially towards you, and you're going to be able to have to understand when you can be like aggressive with them and when you can't be, and when they're overstepping their legal rights. I think it's very important to just have like a rudimentary understanding of, let's just say, a little bit of civil law, and a little bit of contract law, and maybe some general business law. And obviously you want to know your like constitutional rights, right? Like labor law a little bit. Let's just read some books, like maybe a couple Aspen case law books, or Clarendon, depending on what country you live in, right? But Clarendon Law is another great series you can read. You want to know a little bit about law so that you can stand up for yourself when you advance as a human being in life. Now, this last one, I was torn because it's between biographies and history. Like biographies are a great way to get aid in making critical decisions at critical time points in your life, right? There's so many biographies out there where some person comes across a fork in the road, because we have the gift of retrospection. And so we could see that they're at a fork in the road, and we could see the elements in their life because we have knowledge about their family, about their career choices and their passions. We could see how that all plays in terms of them making the decision at this critical period on that fork in the road. And so biographies are great for that, but history is also great in the sense of showing how the decisions that leaders make or that you as a person can make impacts others, and how others respond to that, and which kind of strategies you can take to avoid negative responses from others, or just encourages you to think strategically about other people's responses to your choices, especially when you consider that history is written with the notion that countries have limited resources or that political agents have limited resources, and they're making decisions based off their limited resources, not just like these a priori magical, I have infinite amount of power decisions that a lot of people might actually be susceptible to making, especially if they're high in narcissism. So I think history is just above biographies slightly. They're both pretty competitive there. And to be honest, it's basically a coin toss. You could pick one or the other, but you should definitely read either history or biographies as probably the last genre of importance for using books as a way of developing. So those are my picks for books that are like probably the most important for developing as an individual. I'd be curious to know what you would pick. There are some like runner-ups, because I know people might say like theology, marketing. People might put marketing up there because you are in the business of marketing, but I have found that marketing hasn't helped me that much in life. It is important, but it hasn't helped me as much as these other categories. I'd be curious as to pushback on what you're thinking. But until next time, guys, bye-bye.